I'm Brenda Tremblay, speaking with David Chin, the founder and artistic director of BachFest Malaysia. Hello, David. How are you?
Hi, Brenda. I'm well. How are you?
Wonderful to see you. I'd like to start our conversation a few years before the pandemic when you were living alone in a cottage in a small town in America. What was that experience like, and how did it sort of prepare you for this past year we've lived through together?
So when I was living in Lewisburg, that was the place I was teaching at Buchanan University. It was a short one semester visiting position, and it was a wonderful job. I have met some wonderful students, and the institution is great, and Lewisburg is charming and beautiful. But it was difficult for me, I guess, because that was the first town that I went to after I left Rochester, a wonderful, beautiful city with beautiful people, um, a place where I have lived for 7 or 8 years when I was working on my master's and later my doctoral degree. So then going to a remote town, I guess I was overestimating myself. I wasn't really fully prepared for that. So I went there with very positive attitude, but soon I realized that I was quite isolated. Um, I didn't have the community that I had when I was in Rochester, and my teaching load was quite light, so I had many free times. And because I was only there for a very short amount of time, so I didn't know what I could do. Like when I was in Rochester, I knew so many people. I could put together some concerts. I could attend concerts, go to restaurants with people. But when I was in Louisville, really, other than teaching, I didn't know what to do. I mean, I tried to read. I watch a lot of TV. Um, but I just
It
feel
sounds it it sounds lonely.
it was very lonely, and that was the big lesson for me to learn. Also, I guess it was also a turning point, I would say, yet another turning point of my life. So I have quickly learned, actually, I had to learn after I have moved away from that beautiful town. I had to learn that being alone doesn't mean lonely. So we can be alone, but we can choose not to be lonely. I guess we live in a world, and we grow up growing up, we have been taught, actually, naturally, that we need affirmation from other people, whether it be the works that we do or anything. We always seek for affirmation. We always seek for people to agree with us. But I think that was the big change for me in my life at that point, is that I have learned that we should find fulfillment only in our works, in the things that we do, in our goals, and not trying to live for other people, not trying to please other people. I mean, we have to have, of course, with that, we have to have a very clear goal, a very clear direction. Of course, ultimately, I think we need to really understand ourselves so that we could have that confidence. We could not feel lonely. And also, to be honest, is since then I have learned how to have solo dates with myself. For example, yesterday I went to a very nice steakhouse. I ordered some very, very fancy food. It was just me alone. And I have learned to enjoy that because if you can't spend quality time, if you can't spend time with yourself, I think you will have a hard time spending time with other people. So I'm still learning, but I think I've come a long way. So I'm very grateful for the experience, but I wouldn't want to live it again. Or maybe if I've been given an opportunity to go back, maybe I will live differently and look at it differently.
Well, you're expressing a lesson I think many of us have learned this past year, being isolated and many in lockdown. It's been very hard, especially for singers and conductors and musicians, performers. It's been a very difficult year. What has your life been like in Malaysia?
Well, So, like the rest of the world, we went into lockdown around March 2020. So, it's a little bit over a year ago. I remember when it first began, it was March 17. I remember it so vividly because I had this idea when our government announced the lockdown. I was quite positive actually. My attitudes towards this whole thing, I think that it will go away within a month or so. And I think that while we're waiting in this one short month, we can do a lot of productive things. And at the time, I have been also working on some films, kind of editing kind of things. So I actually immediately, after I canceled all my upcoming concerts for BachFest Malaysia, I wrote to all our musicians, including some of our friends in Germany and in the United States. I I found this chorale from the St. Matthew Passion. It's Befehl du deine Wege. And this chorale speaks so much of the situation. It means that we as human, it is really hard for us to control what is the future. And of course, God has control over the direction of the wind and ultimately the ways of our life. So it's really speaking very deeply to me personally for the situation. So I just asked all our members to record it. I made a conducting video, and then I sent it out to all our members and our friends around the world, asked them to sing and record it and play on the instruments or whatever, and send it back to me within 24 hours. And then I think in less than 36 hours, we produced what for us BachFest Malaysia is the first virtual performance video. I believe at that time it was also the first one for this pandemic. Of course, people have been making virtual performance video long ago, years ago, but for this event, I think we were the first. And I was very shocked because the video immediately went so viral, especially in Germany. And suddenly we feel that it is through music that connected us, not only the music, the message in the music. And many people say they were in tears, they were watching many times, including Dean Rossi at the Eastman School of Music wrote me a very nice email and said that he was very moved and all that. So I guess we did the right thing, and that I was very positive. So constantly thinking what's next. And of course later we found out that the concert tour for BachFest, the Malaysia Bach Festival Singers and Orchestra to perform at the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig. It was scheduled June 2020, and we had to cancel that. And that was a big disappointment and big letdown, but now has been postponed to next year. We'll see if it's going to happen. And then it gets worse for me. It got worse for me because because I always plan my concerts 2 years, 3 years ahead. I always plan my schedule that way. And I always like to know what's next, what's next. But this this pandemic really changed everything. So, of course, I went through also a period of self-doubt again. It kind of reminded me the time when I was in Lewisburg, really thinking, I mean, I'm a very young conductor. I'm full of potential and I'm full of passion. I wanted to do a lot of things, but now seems like I'm just like a retired person sitting at home, just being on Facebook every day and having no goals. And that's the worst thing. So thankfully, I went over to Germany in September of 2019 because I had this project in mind to make a documentary on the music and life of J.S. Bach. So we have all this material that we have filmed. So during the pandemic, luckily I have this thing that helped me to have some goals. So we edited the video. So eventually we got to premiere the documentary film just about 4 months ago, December of 2020. So that was the big thing for me. And in addition, I was also spending time translating a book by a musicologist and Bach researcher Michael Mall. He wrote a new Bach biography and has pointed me to translate that from German into Chinese, and it will be published by BachFest Malaysia. So those two things were what keeping me um, going, although quite slow.
Well, it seems pretty busy. I know you've been doing some virtual conducting lessons and these wonderful videos, your film, which I've seen much of. Let me ask you, I mean, so much of what is at the heart of your ambition and your drive is your love for Johann Sebastian Bach's music. And why do you love it so much?
Well, I think I've shared with you a few years ago when I was on your program. Basically, in the past, I feel like Bach is a very intimidating composer, especially when I was a pianist. It's just so complicated and so uninteresting, and just is music more for the mind, for the science more than for the enjoyment. But until when I went to Eastman and I got to learn all these Bach cantatas, and that just opened up another world of music and possibilities to appreciate his music. Because I think, in short, Bach's music, especially those vocal music, you cannot find another composer that have written a single composer that have written works that can describe all matters of life and every conditions of human being. Really hard. I don't think there was another composer like that that is so thorough and so all-encompassing, that write music that describes all our feelings, our emotion, our views on life, and also afterlife, and all this. So that's the first thing. And secondly, I think I really appreciate Bach, how he is able to express his view on humanity, express his view on theology, express his just all his thoughts, all his wonderful knowledge through the art of sound, which is music. And his music has so many layers. You can enjoy it, with just the sheer quality, like the beautiful melodies or the beautiful counterpoint or the beautiful chords, beautiful harmonies. But you can almost always go one layer deeper, and yet you'll find something new. And I find that very fulfilling as a conductor, as a musician. Just every time going back to his works, although they are quite old, but always we are able to find some new ideas. And ultimately, I was just sharing with my friends over dinner tonight. I think what I appreciate about Bach the most is, you see, he encountered so many difficulties in his life, including being thrown into jail for 1 month. And also, he had to deal with bad employers. He had just so many experiences which didn't contribute to his creativity, but um, he never lowered his standard. He always maintained a high standard no matter where he goes, whether he writes for the St. Thomas Boys Choir, or he writes for students who are not capable to play his music, or he writes for professional or for the Collegium Musicum. His standard never lowered. I mean, that's a big encouragement for me also today, in 2021, as I continue to seek for opportunities, as I continue to constantly asking myself, what is it um, what's the meaning for me as a conductor? Sometimes I think very easily we lower our standard, or we might pick a job that we don't really want or is not our calling, but because it is a job, we decide to do that. And of course, for many people, including myself, sometimes we are being forced to do that because we have to live. We have to have the income, we have to put food on the table. But on the other hand, what I really admire Bach about that is, he not only was he able to do that to provide for his family, 20 children, and experience two wives because of death, but still able to maintain a very high standard. So that's something that will continue to be my goal as an artist and as a human being.
What you're saying reminds me of something that the RPO Conductor Laureate Christopher Seaman has said about some composers that, there's music that appeals to your heart, and there's music that appeals to your head, your intellect, and then there's just music that appeals to your whole body that, makes you feel good. And there are just a few composers. For him, I think it's Brahms, that it applies to his whole being, his heart, his
Yes.
mind, and his body. And I know Bach has that same feeling for so many. Let me ask you, David, what is the name of your documentary? And if someone wanted to watch it, where would they find it?
Everyone can find it easily. It's on YouTube and it's called Encountering Bach. And just type in Encountering Bach and you'll be able to see it should be the first thing on top. And it is a 2 hours documentary, but it takes you through the life of Bach from his childhood to his time in St. Thomas Church in Leipzig. And I also had the privilege to speak with 15 guests, including some of the most um, famous Bach researchers of our day and also musicians, singers. They all share their stories of Bach, and so we also get to see some original manuscript of Bach. We go into the library at the Bach Archive in Leipzig, where the musicologist will show us the handwriting of Bach, and also from the manuscript, how do we determine how do we perform his music, that sort of thing. So I think it's pretty fun. It's accessible not only for to musicians but for everyone. So I highly encourage everyone to watch it, and it's free. So, but not cheap. It's free.
Well, let me ask you this, David. I know that when your documentary was released, and there was a little bit of pushback on social media, and I know one person implied that maybe Malaysians should stay within their own culture. That because you're a Malaysian, you should talk about Malaysian composers and Malaysian music. Um, what have you learned about diversity growing up in Malaysia that has carried with you as you've traveled all over the world?
Personally, I think this just come to my mind. I think in order to support diversity is not to diversify people. So growing up in Malaysia, because Malaysia is a multicultural country, we have people of all colors, religion, and we have Malays, we have Indian, and we have people like me, fourth generation Chinese in Malaysia. So we won't consider ourselves as mainlanders or from the Republic of China, but we are Malaysian Chinese and we are Malaysian. Yeah. So, and of course, there's several other minorities as well in Malaysia. Of course, we have racism, and I think racism happens already in the beginning of civilization. I think the root of racism is that people simply cannot accept others who are different from them, whether it be color, whether it be the language, whether it be habit, food, anything, religion. So I think it is very important for us to know that we see human as human. So for me, to conduct Bach music, I never thought of him. I mean, he's a white guy and he is from the West, but I never look at him that way because his music speaks directly to me personally. David Chin, who a Chinese, live in Malaysia in 2021. I am very moved by his music, and I want to share a short story with you. And this was in 2019, one of our last major concert. We did three performances of St. Matthew Passion in Malaysia, two in the capital city where people are used to going to concert, and we actually brought one performance to a very small and remote town in South Malaysia because there was a new concert hall being built in a high school and we had some connections, so we just brought the entire St. Matthew Passion there. We were very concerned. The hall can sit about 800 people, but this is a small town. Like people go to bed at 9:30 in the evening, and there's no classical music activities whatsoever. We're bringing a 3 hours German work into a remote town in Malaysia. That was a huge risk, but to our surprise, the tickets sold out 2 weeks before the concert, even quicker than the capital city. And we were we were like, well, maybe the less thing going on happening there, so people like to come and to watch performance. They have no idea what it is. So these people came on concert day, and we were like, well, half of the room gonna leave during intermission because they're not gonna stand Bach, they're not gonna stand German music. To our surprise, yet again, after intermission, our ushers told us that only four people left, two couples. So the rest of them stay, and I remember very vividly because I look at my watch when I walk off the stage after the last number. It was already 10:20, way past their bedtime. All have to go to school and work the next morning. I got five curtain calls, Brenda. Five curtain calls. Not only that, we saw a post on Facebook by one of the audience members. He is over 50 years old. He is a Buddhist. Yeah. He wrote this, of course, he's not a musician, probably never attended a classical music concert. He said, wow, the concert was great. The singers were great, the orchestra was great and all that. But the last big paragraph, this is what he said as a Buddhist. After listening to Bach's and Matthew Passion, I found that I have underestimated the suffering of Christ my entire life. Imagine that a Malaysian who doesn't speak German, had nothing to do with German culture, after listening to 3 hours of German work as a Buddhist, and this was his conclusion. And I found that very moved. And I mean, not that he's gonna convert to become a Christian or anything like that, but just that I think we have accomplished Bach's purpose in that we are not just putting on a performance, but really the music really speaks the message in the music, which that was the purpose that Bach composed all this music. Although BachFest Malaysia is not a religion community, we are not a religion organization, but it speaks a lot how a German guy wrote this long piece for church services almost 300 years ago. And I don't think Bach would ever imagine his music would be heard 300 years later in a remote town in Malaysia, and someone is so moved by it.
What a fantastic story. That's amazing, David. And it really speaks to the power of music, the power of music across time and space and distance and culture. That's wonderful.
Connected.
Congratulations. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Let me ask you about, your plans maybe moving forward. You said you are hoping to sing with your ensemble next year in Leipzig, right? Next summer, maybe?
Yeah. So next year is a big year if everything goes well. Goes as planned. I'm very honored. In March, I'll be conducting Bach's Magnificat in Carnegie Hall, and with my Carnegie Hall debut, it is invite. I was invited by the Mid America Productions, and then in June, the Malaysia Bach Festival Singers and Orchestra will travel to Germany and will perform three chorale cantatas at the St. Thomas Church, where these three pieces were first written and first performed by Bach. So I'm really looking forward to that, not only because we get a chance to perform, but also I think it's very important for our musicians to be in an international festival to really watch all these specialists, all these early music specialists perform. And I hope that through this experience, that some of our musicians, one way or the other, will be moved and will be fired up, and I hope that they will bring that fire back to Malaysia and continue to spread it. So that's my goal. And of course, then it would be at the end of the year. I was also invited to East Malaysia to conduct Beethoven Missa Solemnis. This is a concert tour with a combined church choir and orchestra. So I look forward to that. And of course, nowadays we don't know if anything will happen, but I'm hoping for the best and that all this will happen. And there might also be an opera production of a Handel opera in the summer, but that's still in negotiation. So
What's your website, David?
my website is www.davidchinmusic.com.
So if someone wants to follow your career, follow you, they can find you on social media in there as well. Well, let me ask you one more question, and that is, if you had to sum up in just a couple of sentences, one lesson that you have learned this past year as a conductor and a passionate classical musician, what is it?
I think that would be always have a goal so that no matter in what circumstances, that we always have something to look forward to, and knowing the fact that however well we can make plans, um, plans can fall apart so easily. So we have to learn that human are so insignificant and so small, and we really do not have the entire world controlled in our hand. So we have to realize that and be grateful and always be productive.
Absolutely. Words to live by. Thank you so much, David. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Brenda. Thanks for having me.
David Chin is the founder and artistic director of BachFest Malaysia, and I'm Brenda Tremblay with WXXI Classical in Rochester, New York.